Hello interwebs, welcome to Adamant IT. I've got a gift from Andonstar today. This is the AD409 microscope, and this is the Pro version with the big, huge screen on it. Look at the size of that thing. Let's take a closer look. Right, let's quickly do the unboxing to see what you get in this package, and then we'll get to having a discussion about these kinds of microscopes. This is a monocular microscope, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, because we do need to have a conversation about that before I continue about this. But at any rate, so in the box, we've got the unit itself, big old screen, and there's the actual microscope on the back of it. This folds down, so when you have it in that orientation, it starts making a bit more sense as to what you're looking at. And there is a stand and everything in here as well. So let's see what we've got in there. So we've got the microscope. We've got a remote control for it, which is useful because you can adjust menu items and stuff like that without touching it or knocking it or jogging it and so on. We'll go over what features this can actually do for you later. We've got a power supply in there. That's a USB power supply. We've got another USB power source there, and let's see, we've got some lights, light, might be another one in there somewhere, various fittings and adapters. There is a HDMI to mini HDMI cable, that's a nice touch. Fittings. And then we've got the base and the stand. And is that another? Those more lights and more lights. Yeah, so we've got 3 lights total there. That's cool. We've got these 2 plus an extra floaty one. So I'll talk more about this in a moment, because one of the big things about buying microscopes like this is the stands they usually come with are quite often not really particularly useful, which again I'll talk about more once we get into it. But I think this one's going to be interesting because the Pro version has a significantly bigger base on it, which I think will actually be large enough to actually have practical use. So what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to get this all out and I'm going to set it all up as intended, and we'll start talking about this guy and how it works and what it can and can't do. Oh, rad. That came with a little 32 gig SD card as well. Okay, so I've got this thing set up in its most basic form, but first we need to provide a few words on different types of microscope. So this is a monocular microscope, meaning it has one port and it has a camera looking down through that port, and it displays that on the screen. It also has a HDMI output, so we can then view that on an external monitor, or we can run it into a capture card so we can record the footage of what we're looking at. Now, the big disadvantage of a monocular microscope is that you have no depth perception. So when I place something under the scope, it is very difficult to tell how far away it is. It goes out of focus, but this doesn't tell us anything about how high or low it is from the bottom. So this makes them significantly harder to work under when you're doing soldering and stuff like that. It is more than possible to work under them. I use an older form of this scope as my daily driver already, but the other types of microscope, binocular and trinocular, provide depth perception, and that makes them much, much easier to work under as well. So a binocular or trinocular scope has 2 eyepieces that you look through with your human eyes, and that means you get your depth perception so you can see how high or low things are. And that makes it a lot easier when you're using a soldering iron. The difference of a trinocular scope is that it has a 3rd port which you can then mount a camera to. So a trinocular microscope gives you the depth perception and a camera as well. Now, a half-decent trinocular microscope of a lesser known brand but still decent quality from AliExpress costs about the same amount as one of these. However, that's without the camera. So if the camera feed is actually valuable to you, then one of these monocular microscopes becomes significantly better value for money. Whereas if you don't need the video feed, then a binocular or trinocular scope without the camera is going to give you a better user experience at the cost of not having the video feed. So I'll let you make up your own mind for that. For some people, having a screen to look at instead of having to look through eyepieces, that alone might be better because of accessibility reasons or some other comfort reason or whatever. Maybe it's just because you want a buddy who can also see what's on the screen next to you. But I'll let you make up your own mind as to what is useful to you, depth perception or the video feed. Or you can go trinocular with a camera and have everything, but that's going to cost you a lot more. So with that being the case, let's look into the feature set of this one. Right, I've got this guy all set up now, so we're going to go over the feature set of it. Now, it's kind of difficult to get everything framed up so you guys can see everything, so work with me here. But at any rate, I've got this guy configured. We're sitting on the Pro stand. I'm looking at it from the back here just because that way you can see the setup and you can see what's plugged in. We've got the two little gooseneck lights pointing down here. They're not as good as a ring light. A ring light will obviously give you better light coverage, better light angling and stuff like that. However, they do have decent LEDs in them. You do get a really nice natural white light out of these. The cheap ring light I have on my AD407 has just a really cold, low CRI lighting output on it, and that makes the image very very unpleasant to look at. You know, it works, you can see it, but it's very blue tinted and stuff like that. This gives a really nice natural white color that I much prefer, which is why I haven't just immediately slapped my ring light onto this. Ultimately, if you've got a really high quality ring light, that will give you better light output. It is possible to put ring lights on these, just bear in mind you'll need something that can adjust down to quite a narrow, I don't know what you call this bit, lens, I guess. But the cheap ones on Amazon will do the job. So we've got the two lights there. I've also got the endoscope connected, which is this guy coming around the back here, which also has its own light. So I'll show you how that works in just a moment as well. But first, I have to talk about my biggest grievance with this product. And that is that you cannot have the display and HDMI output at the same time. You get one or the other, not both. This is in stark contrast to, again, my AD407, which gives me both. You've seen me using my AD407 in repair videos where I'm very clearly looking at the screen while you guys have a HDMI capture preview of what I'm looking at. I can't do that here. If I plug in a HDMI cable, the screen goes off. At first I thought I was doing something wrong, but I actually confirmed this by email with Andonstar to make sure I wasn't making a mistake, and they confirmed that that is by design. I can only assume that the microcontroller in this guy is not fast enough to handle the higher resolution screen and HDMI output at the same time. My response to that is then put a faster microprocessor in there. Because for me, this is actually a deal breaker, and this is actually the reason why this will not be replacing my AD407, which I'm very sad about because the screen is glorious. The 1280 by 800 display is brilliant. You get a really clear picture on this, but I need the HDMI output. So you might say, okay, well, isn't the point of these things to have the HDMI capture, right? Well, even with no HDMI capture, you can still record to SD card. So when I do the footage from this for this review, I'm going to be recording to SD card internally on it instead. So this solves the problem for pre-recorded stuff. However, there's two major scenarios where that's not going to be good enough. Scenario one is your live streaming repairs. Because if you're live streaming, you need HDMI capture because you have a live audience that needs to see what you're seeing in real time. So that means that I could not use this for any kind of live streams. So for example, on Saturdays when I'm doing the tech podcast with Caradog, if we are fixing a thing and I'm like, oh, let's look at this under the microscope, can't do that. Or at least in order to do that, I have to be able to see the preview at the same time. And of course, if I'm seeing the preview, then what's the point of having the nice big screen on it, right? So the other big use case against that is, let's say you're using this in a lab or an educational department. If this is like in a classroom or something like that, or if you just have an apprentice, you want to be sitting at the microscope doing your work, and you want a nice big TV or a big monitor with the HDMI output going to it, so your student or your apprentice or whoever can see what you're doing. This can't do that. The only way this can do that is if you output to the big screen, and then I have to watch the big screen as well. And if I'm watching the big screen, why do I need a nice big screen on the scope when I could just buy the cheaper 7-inch scope and just not worry about it? Or buy the 7-inch scope and have the screen at the same time. So big, massive downer. I'm incredibly sad about that. But it is what it is. I'll continue. So no HDMI output and screen at the same time, but we can record to SD card and have the screen at the same time. So with all that being said, let me push the record button on the scope and show you what that looks like. So first of all here, we're currently at 1080p 30 FPS with the recording. And the reason why it's only 30 FPS is because I have the endoscope connected as well. Once I've demonstrated the endoscope, I'm going to remove that, because without the endoscope connected, we can go up to higher resolutions. So we're stuck at 30 FPS, which is not stunning, but it's good enough. But as you can see, we've got a really great view. I can come in and inspect at all angles here. And we can come up to that side, have a look at those solder joints and get a really clear view of stuff. So this is very similar in performance to my existing AD407, and it's a really good view. You have to do quite a lot of work to get anything better than this, based on my research anyway. So we get a really good view. We can adjust the lighting. If you've got too much light, we can turn the lights down a little bit, and that actually just gives us a little bit less glare actually. So depending on whether you want to see traces or solder joints, having lower lighting can be in your favor. So as you can see, we've got a great view there. The quality is slightly superior to my AD407, and that's both because the optics of the lens, maybe it's just because this is brand new and not a used one, or perhaps it's just because they've just improved the optics a little bit. Coupled with the bigger and clearer display, I'm getting a better view, basically. Again, I'm really sad about the whole HDMI output situation, because I really want to use this as my daily driver, but I need that HDMI output, man, at the same time. Otherwise, there's just no point for me. So anyway, as you can see, we've got a little bit of fringing around the right-hand edge there and a little bit to the left, but it's not as pronounced as it is on the AD407. The actual, the effective field of view is slightly superior to my eye anyway. So let's talk about the endoscope camera, so then I can disconnect that and get a higher quality recording. What I'm going to do, if I push, so what I need to do now is, because I'm going to change the view, I have to stop recording, change the view, and then start recording again. So I'm going to quickly do that. So I'll push OK on the front of it. And then I'm going to push on the NTL PAL button on the controller, because that changes views. And I'll start recording. And so now we've got the endoscope camera. So let's just line this up with something. And as you can see, I've got a little sideways cam now. And this sideways cam can get in really close to stuff. So we can get right up close. Then let me just position this. Takes a little bit of fettling to get it right, but we can get right on in there. And with this crazy depth of field, get right up and close and personal with some of these parts and actually see what's going on down at the board level. So this is good. So you might say, okay, well, what is this good for? Because you could hold that, you could just tilt the board sideways and look at it down the main acquisition lens, right? Yes, however, what the endoscope is good for is being able to get to places that you can't tilt to. So let's say you've got a widget that is constructed, like you might have stacked PCBs, or you might have a large part that is just a big part on the board, and you just can't angle it and get it under the microscope camera. Well, what you can do then is you can use this endoscope to get around the side and peer in. And you can do that using the array of attachments that it comes with. It's got little narrow bits that focus the light down to a pinpoint. It's got a little angled mirror so you can see around corners and all sorts of things like that. One particular use case for it, which I will only be able to demonstrate with the HDMI capture, so let me switch out to this, because while I can record either camera, I can't record both of them at the same time. So let me get this into a state where I can have both on screen. So I'll hit stop recording. Now I'm going to switch to the picture-in-picture view, and I'm just going to plug in the HDMI cable so you guys can see that. Right, so now we're on the HDMI output, so the screen in front of me is now just black. However, if I had the HDMI disconnected, as you can see, I would now have this picture-in-picture view. So how is this useful? Well, what I can do now is let's take a look at the RAM chip. So let's move up to here, and then I'll just adjust the endoscope camera, bring him down to there, get that focused, and I'll just change the view. Let's just change that to endoscope only so I can really see it. Make sure that is properly focused. There we go. And go back to picture-in-picture. So now what I could be doing is I could be hot airing this RAM chip here, or soldering it, and I can use that to hold my my hot air station at the right angle, really see what I'm doing, eyes on the target, and I've got that little endoscope preview in the top left there that's got a clear sight of the solder balls so I can see the moment that the chip starts to flow. So that is one example of how this endoscope can be useful, because now I have two camera angles at the same time, which I think is pretty cool. It's not something that I think I would be using every day, but I can see the use cases for this as well. So depending on what you're doing, this might be incredibly valuable to you. Either just being able to get into awkward views that the main lens can't get to, or being able to see two views at the same time on one screen. So very handy. So I've now disconnected the endoscope camera, and with only one camera to deal with, we now have full 1080p 60 FPS. So as you can see, we've got much smoother video now. So I don't think it makes a meaningful difference to the quality of the image, just the frame rate. So do bear in mind that if you want to use that endoscope camera, you do lose a lot of frame rate. You probably noticed that when I did the HDMI capture as well. Without the endoscope connected, actually, you know what, I'll just plug in the capture and just show you what that looks like. Without the endoscope connected, you do get drastically better performance out of this guy. This gives you an idea of the kind of quality to expect. So let's go to the HDMI capture. Just stop recording there. So with the HDMI output, we dropped to 30 frames a second, but we still have that nice, big, clear, crisp live output. So we can tinker with the picture settings while we're here as well. I'll just use the control because it's easier. And now with the HDMI capture, I can also show you the on-screen controls here. So under the resolution, I can now specify what resolution we're recording at. So it's worth noting, this is the resolution that we will be recording to the SD card to. So if I set this to 4K 24 FPS, that doesn't mean I get an output resolution of that. That's just what it's going to put onto the SD card. Now, I've done some tests for the 1440p and 4K recordings, and I didn't feel like it was capturing a meaningful amount more detail in the footage. So it depends on your use case. I suspect that it's doing a little bit of scaling up, to be brutally honest. Either way, I would probably take the 1080p 60 FPS option, because then you get 60 frames a second, which is going to give you a much nicer looking video feed. Frame rate is always superior in my opinion, but that's just me. We can also dial in different exposure levels here as well, so we can adjust things, step that up to 1, and we can underexpose if we need to as well. So adjustments are available there. Set that back to 0. We can put a date stamp on there. We can adjust the digital sharpness. So as you can see, we've got some sharpening going on. I can soften that up a little bit. Not sure if I saw the difference there. What if we go all the way up to strong? Yeah, not going to lie, I'm not seeing the difference there, so we'll leave that alone. There's another feature here called freeze, and there is a single button controller on here for this. So if I just come out of there, right now I can move the subject around, and if I'm trying to answer my phone, one moment everyone. Okay, so let's say that I've just fiddled around to find exactly the right light angle so I can read what's on this chip, and I'm like, okay, I need that. What I can do now is I'll press the freeze button on the remote, boop, and now it's just completely frozen the image. So now that image is locked on screen, I can move the board around and we're not seeing anything, and it's locked on screen, so now I've got a visual indicator and I can be like, cool, TPS 51116, no problem. And then when I'm ready again, I'll just push the button again and the picture is released. And we're back. So useful freeze feature, very handy. So what else can we do with this thing? So we can also put it into picture mode. So what happens if I do that while I'm capturing? There we go, so there's picture mode. So now we can see the snapshot that I took momentarily just then by pressing the actual picture button. And if I scroll back, I should be able to see, there we go. So now I can push play on that and I can play back footage that I was previously recording. And I can also play it back at high speed as well. So we've got full controls from here as well. So that's quite handy. So let me give you my thoughts on the Pro stand here. The base models of these guys, the AD407 and the ones that don't have the Pro stand, they come with a much more basic stand, which is functional. However, the big limitation of it is that it just does not have a lot of height adjustment. The Pro stand has got this big, huge, tall post on the back of it, which means we get loads of height adjustment. If I just back that screw out, I can move up and down by a significant amount in either direction. And that allows me to get either very close or very far from the subject. And on this setting that I've got it to just near the top, I've got loads of room underneath the lens to work. So, you know, I can put my hand there, you can see I've got plenty of space, even bringing in a hot air, which takes up loads of room, can still get under there, no problem at all. Likewise, this adjustment here allows me to move it in and out. And we have got this wheel here, which is my up-down control. Now, this guy I'm not so impressed with, because normally on a microscope, you should have what is effectively your zoom control, which is just moving nearer or further away from the subject. But this, you get like, what is that? Maybe 2 inches of travel? Maybe only 1 inch, actually, now I think about it. Yeah, I think we only actually get about 1 inch in or out. And this just feels like, this feels kind of pointless to me. I don't understand why this has such a short amount of travel on it. By comparison, the AD407, let me just bring that into view. This is my AD407. Now, this is on a modified monitor arm mount, so ignore everything black and backwards, ignore that. However, this section here, this is from the original mount. And on this guy, you can see I've got, from the top, all this travel, all the way down to the bottom, down to there. I've got all that range on this to go in and out as required. So, now, obviously with this one, if I need more range than that, I don't have it because there's no screw to go up and down a post. So this one, obviously, the AD409 on the Pro stand, we've got that adjustment to actually adjust the entire assembly up and down. But that wouldn't be necessary if we had more travel on this guy. So yeah, as I say, I'm not quite on board with how little travel I get with this. In my limited use of this scope, I've basically just not used that control at all. I've just undone the screw at the back and moved the entire assembly higher or lower. So yeah, not super impressed by that, just because the point of this stand is to be this is the good stand that's got more adjustment on it and stuff like that. So a little bit less impressed there. One of the things I do like about it is the fact of, the Pro stand, it's got the built-in lights, and I do like how the cable that comes with it, this is powered from a single USB adapter, and that it plugs into the stand and powers the lights, and it's got a little USB cable that comes up and powers the scope as well. By comparison, to achieve the same thing on my AD407, I've got a power cable going into my ring light, and then I've custom modified a buck converter to get a 5-volt output to power the scope. So I had to do custom wiring to power this from a single power source. Whereas the Pro stand, this guy can all run off of a single power source, which is really neat. And it does have this natty little brightness control and on-off control as well. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, I've got mixed opinions about it. The Pro stand, obviously, because you've got this pole, it does also allow you to put on the other attachments, the endoscope and things like that. And this endoscope mount, this is just effectively, 2 rings with some set screws on. So you could put other stuff in there. You could have this hold other things if you wanted to. So there are other uses you can use for all of this stuff. While I'm not 100% convinced about everything as it comes out of the box, you can use this stuff to custom make other solutions that work for you. And I think that's something that you should kind of expect to do with a lot of equipment, to be honest. There are so many different use cases and so many people have different requirements that it's difficult to have a one thing fits all. So just giving you lots of just stuff to mix and match and work with is up to you. Like this extra little ring is on the back here. I've got that just as an extra set screw, just so if this guy accidentally comes loose or something, it can't fall out. But you could use this to hold other things in place. I could put that on there. I could put that below to have a minimum height that it will drop down to and stuff like that. So you can mix and match these fittings to do with as you please. Okay, so let's talk about pricing and conclusions. So firstly, the price. So this is the AD409 with Pro stand and endoscope. So this is with all the bells and whistles. Now you can buy these on Amazon. The base price for just the AD409 with the regular stand, that's a lower stand, comes in at £360. Then it's $390 with the Pro stand and $417 with the endoscope as well. However, it is significantly cheaper if you buy it from AliExpress and order it in from China. On AliExpress, you can get this setup with the Pro stand and the endoscope. £330 delivered is the price I'm looking at on my screen right now. So price-wise, I think the price is very justified for what you're getting. Again, if you're comparing this versus binocular or trinocular microscopes, then again, you need to consider use cases for that, as we discussed at the start of the video. But for what you're getting, this gives you a stunningly good, very close-up picture of what you're looking at without having to look through eyepieces with HDMI output. The fact that you can't do the screen and HDMI out at the same time on the AD409 is a big sad, in my opinion. But again, consider use cases. It can still record to SD and do the screen at the same time. So if you don't need live content, this is arguably a non-issue. You still get the recording of your footage, which is what most people are really after. So the picture quality versus the older models like the AD407, it is superior. The big 10-inch display gives you a really, really crisp picture. And I think the actual optics are improved. I think that is a better picture than the older model as well. So that is also worth considering. If you desperately need HDMI output at the same time as the screen, then you're going to want to go for one of the 7-inch models. But again, that's not the end of the world. This is a review for the AD409, but it's also kind of sort of a review for the Andonstar microscopes in general for me. So hopefully this has given you an idea on what these things are like. Lots of people do ask me what scope I'm using. Now you know. You know the pros and the cons of it. I don't think this is the best option in the world. However, if you're looking for something mid-range, it's a really good answer, because when you see people who do have really slick microscope setups, You know, if they've got like the really expensive brands, their setup may have cost them £800, a grand, that kind of money. You know, even being generous, it may have cost them 600, which is twice the price that this was. So take that into consideration when you're thinking about what you want to buy. It does depend on how much you want to spend. You spend more money, you get something better. But for value for money, these things are pretty good, I think. Because of its inability to do HDMI output and the screen at the same time, I don't think this is going to take the place of my AD407. However, I do think it's a great microscope. I'm really, really sad that it can't do HDMI output at the same time. My message to Andonstar would definitely be, please upgrade the internals just that little bit more. Because I'm guessing that it's a horsepower issue, and if you guys put a slightly bigger micro in this thing that can handle the HDMI output and the 1280 by 800 display at the same time, at that point I would sit this on my desk. However, I need that HDMI output at the same time as the screen. Sorry guys. Anyway, I hope you guys found that interesting, and if you do want to buy one of these, I will include Amazon links and AliExpress links down below. I don't think my AliExpress affiliate links work, but buy from wherever you want. AliExpress is cheaper. However, if you don't want to get anything else from Amazon, then you can also use my affiliate link for that instead. Thanks everyone. See you in the next video. Bye.